The year is 1861. The southern states of America have just seceded from the country in an elaborate attempt to uphold the staple of their economy, slavery. Fierce fighting commences, and then, as the dust settles, it is clear. The North has won. At Appomattox Courthouse, General Lee of the South and General Grant from the North come together, and the South formally surrenders. In the wake of this terrible and bloody war, the Southern economy changed drastically. Slavery, which had been used for decades before the war, was outlawed. Sharecropping was instituted to try and mimic slavery, but it was evident that the days of such labor were over. The South was in a state of economic disaster. Meanwhile, their loathsome neighbors to the north were a much more different story. During the war, the Union constructed many factories, railroads, and technologically superior advancements as compared to the Confederacy. So, as the Gilded Age took hold, industry was far better developed in the North than in the South. From the ashes of dead soldiers emerged an economic growth like no other. Manufacturing and industry became massive global endeavors, solidifying large corporations into powerful national drivers. The issue of agriculture in comparison to industry was at the heart of antebellum debates, and as it seems, the debate had settled in the large favor of industry. This rise in industry gave rise to the idea of the silk-stocking individuals known as the robber barons. Important industrial owners like Carnegie and Rockefeller became renowned for their influence and ability, while at the same time they were hated for their insufferable swindle of the people's money through corporate greed. The monopolies were able to crush smaller businesses, specifically farmers who were unable to pay the exorbitant prices on necessities. For example, the monopolized railroad industry dramatically upcharged farmers when transporting products. Times of economic panic consolidated the railroad industry, allowing for more exploitation of the farmers. Northern and Western farmers grew crops for national and international markets, so they relied on the railroads and needed beneficial trade policies. However, the farmers were clearly neglected by their government and in dire need of assistance. To help ameliorate the farmers' conditions, new technology emerged. Gang plows and sulky plows allowed for faster and more efficient soil separation. Steam tractors provided a powerful alternative to animal-drawn plows. Spring-tooth harrow improved seed beds preparation. Twine binders were machines that revolutionized wheat harvesting, increasing speed and efficiency. Combines, reaper threshers, combined harvesting and threshing, further increasing efficiency. These technological advancements made it to livestock too. Cream separators allowed for easier and more efficient milk processing on farms. Deep well drilling provided access to more reliable sources of water for irrigation and for livestock. Barbed wire allowed for land to be divided, which helped dramatically with livestock management. This advancement made its way into legislature too. The Morrill Land Grant College Act of 1862 provided land for agricultural and industrial colleges, fostering research and education in farming practices. Agricultural experiment stations conducted research to improve crop yields, soil health, and overall farming practices. The use of commercial fertilizers increased significantly, boosting crop production. Scientists developed and improved crop varieties, increasing their resilience and yield potential. All of these innovations led to an increase in supply and a decrease in prices. Although it improved efficiency, the advancements in agricultural technology did not help the farmers. They had increased supply, but this reduced prices. The farmers made less money when they sold their crops and had to buy the new machinery to keep up with other farmers. The technology was so expensive that many farmers went into debt to obtain it. Poor farmers went out of business, contributing to a general decrease in the proportion of Americans that were farmers. The few that did remain farmers became tenants or sharecroppers. Along with this, the money supply in America was expanding slower than the economy. This caused deflation. Deflation can be thought of as negative inflation, the gaining of a currency's buying power, or a decrease in prices. Loans became harder to pay off because the value of the debt increased. More labor was needed to pay off the same amount of debt, and this, along with extremely high interest rates, hurt farmers that borrowed money for farming equipment. This ties into the gold standard America was using prior. The gold standard was the method of backing the US currency with gold as its primary source. But farmers and debtors supported using silver along with gold so the money supply would grow and deflation would stop. They advocated for this policy of bimetallism and the unlimited coinage of silver. The railroad companies were not friends of the farmer. They charged high rates to transport and store grain, while large companies paid less for transportation through rebates. Various financial panics consolidated the railroads and reduced competition, allowing for the farmers to be exploited. Trusts and interlocking directorates also reduced competition. The railroad companies often made agreements called pools that fixed rates. These issues and injustices were the reason for the creation of the National Grange Movement. The movement started as a way to educate farmers, but later started advocating for farmers politically. They pushed states to pass Granger laws, regulating the rates charged by railroads and preventing price fixing. One important court case, Munn v. Illinois, upheld these laws in 1877, but it was overturned 9 years later in 1886. Many of the Granger laws were struck down because they dealt with interstate commerce. This Grange movement led directly into what's known as the Farmers' Alliances. These alliances also advocated for farmers. Several of these groups met in 1890 to draft the Ocala Platform, calling for various reforms. Some of the reforms were lower tariffs, a progressive income tax, and direct elections for U.S. senators. They wanted lower tariffs so farmers could afford goods and sell internationally. The government subsidized railroad companies, and the farmers wanted the government to help the people instead of corporations. This gave rise to a new prospective party. The People's Party, more commonly called the Populist Party, was founded in 1891 to deal with the problems of the two-party system. The 1892 presidential election was coming up, and the Omaha Platform was the official party platform of the Populists, containing many similarities with the Ocala Platform. The policies it advocated included government ownership of railroads and telegraph lines, and the use of referendum, initiative, direct election of U.S. senators, unlimited coinage of silver, progressive income tax, federal storage for crops, and an 8-hour workday. A lot of this reflects the feelings of the Western farmers. They felt like they did not have enough of a say in their government and that its economic policies harmed them. But the Populists were not just Western farmers. Thomas Watson, a big American influence, promoted the Populist Party in the South. Two politicians, James Weaver and James Field, were nominated for president and vice president for the party. Weaver fought for the Union, but Field fought for the Confederacy. It was an attempt to unite the West and South under populism to overcome the Northern business class. Populists supported industrial workers, but they had different economic interests, so urban and industrial areas largely voted against the Populists. They were concerned about how inflation would affect them. The Republicans nominated incumbent President Benjamin Harrison, and the Democrats nominated former President Grover Cleveland. In the end, Cleveland won, with the Weaver Field ticket only winning 5 western states. The election showed that the Populists had potential, but lacked national support. Cleveland began his second but non-consecutive term. He was an opponent of bimetallism, supporting gold. In his first term, he vetoed the Texas Seed Bill, which would have aided farmers in Texas. It was clear that he was not a friend of the Populists. The Republicans were against silver, while the Democrats were divided on it. As Cleveland's second term was coming to an end, the election year of 1896 was approaching. The Democrats nominated a very attractive candidate named William Jennings Bryan. He gave a fiery speech called "The Cross of Gold" at the convention about the need for bimetallism, which is the use of silver and gold to back the US dollar. He was a man of the people, supporting an 8-hour workday, the end of child labor, a progressive income tax, and the unlimited coinage of silver.
Having behind us the producing masses of this nation and the world, supported by the commercial interests, the laboring interests, and the toilers everywhere, we will answer their demand for a gold standard by saying to them, "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold."
William Jennings Bryan was a Democrat with many populist beliefs, but his nomination presented a problem for the Populists. Would they nominate Bryan or nominate their own candidate? The Populists were divided between two groups: the Fusionists, otherwise called the Mid-Roaders, and the Anti-Fusionists. The Fusionists wanted to run a fusion ticket with the Democrats and support a common candidate. The Anti-Fusionists wanted a separate candidate. One of the Fusionists was former Populist nominee James Weaver, a crucial endorsement for Bryan. The Fusionists prevailed, as both parties nominated Bryan for president, but they nominated a different candidate for vice president than the Democrats. The Democrats nominated Arthur Sewall, while the Populists chose Thomas Watson. The Republicans chose William McKinley, the namesake of the McKinley Tariff of 1890. Some Democrats supported the use of gold and broke away from the Democratic Party. These were called gold bugs. Election day came, and Bryan won most of the South and the West. Bryan lost California, Oregon, and Kentucky by only a few thousand votes or less each. Kentucky was decided by less than 200 votes. Even with these states, Bryan still would have needed 24 more electoral votes to win. McKinley won 271 to 176 with the help of a genius campaign led by Marcus Hanna, chairman of the Republican National Committee. The industrial North had triumphed over the agrarian West and South. This election solidified that the United States would be ruled by policies that benefited the Northern businessmen and Northern interests. To further elaborate on the details of this election, we will turn to our esteemed interlocutor, Drish Nanavati.
What did Marcus Hanna do in the election of 1896?
So before we get into that, Marcus Hanna is a man to be defined as McKinley's right-hand man. He was in charge of much of McKinley's campaign, obviously, but he initially began as an industrialist, right? As an industrialist, he allied with other prominent Republican figures, but various squabbles between them drove him closer to McKinley's side. At McKinley's side, Marcus Hanna modernized the presidential campaign via campaign buttons, telephone, and organizing the front porch campaign, wherein McKinley just stayed at his home in Canton, and droves and droves of visitors came to listen to his policy ideas for the presidency. Marcus Hanna was crucial to McKinley's win in 1896 and 1900, wherein he also advocated for McKinley alongside Theodore Roosevelt, despite not agreeing with that vice presidential pick.
What was the appeal of McKinley?
So largely the appeal of McKinley was to his pro-business attitude. Many business magnates, such as Vanderbilt, JP Morgan, they ended up supporting him because he opposed the free silver platform that William Jennings Bryan brought forth. Because the nation at this point was recovering from the Panic of 1893, caused, well, not necessarily caused, but it happened under a Democrat president, that being Wilbur Cleveland. And McKinley promised a gradual return to normalcy, kind of, in his full dinner pail slogan. And most people were on board with that because they saw Jennings Bryan's, his policies to be too radical with his bimetallism and free silver thoughts. And McKinley in 1900 also focused on his foreign policy exploits, like the Spanish-American War and his acquisition of new territories abroad.
Do you think Bryan would have run if it wasn't for Marcus Hanna?
That is an interesting question because it revolves around a hypothetical, right? Marcus Hanna was crucial to the McKinley campaign, but it's also possible that he could have won without Hanna's help. But more likely than that, because of Jennings Bryan's his base in the West and how much support his brand of populism got, I think it is possible to say that he could have won had Marcus Hanna not been an influencing factor in McKinley's campaign.
Was McKinley a rather unique Republican figure, or just an ordinary Republican?
I would not call him ordinary, because his method of leadership differed greatly from other Republican greats of the time, like Foraker or Sherman, in that he quietly and in the background orchestrated everything he wanted to happen without being explicit or open about it. In that he manipulated each of his available resources, that being his cabinet members, his friends in Congress, all that, to help push his own agenda of pro-business and helping the nation recover after a terrible panic in 1893.
What was the appeal of William Jennings Bryan?
So William Jennings Bryan, he was a fantastic orator. That's where much of his popularity came from. And again, because of this panic of 1893, he brought about a brand of populism wherein free silver would be tolerated as a form of currency to help struggling farmers, struggling workers in general, and help them alleviate themselves from the conflicts of the Panic of 1893. And in 1900, he also fought on an anti-imperialist platform, championing the views of the Anti-Imperialist League and others who believed it was morally wrong, and other reasons to imperialize other nations like the Philippines during the Spanish-American War, headed by McKinley, obviously.
Do you think William Jennings Bryan would have run if there was another Republican candidate that was nominated?
Absolutely, because the nomination of McKinley did not determine the nomination of William Jennings Bryan. He was willing to run for multiple elections, honestly, and it just so happened that McKinley was his opponent and was a more successful opponent than he was in both the election of 1896 and 1900.
Why was McKinley more attractive than Bryan?
Well, outside of being pro-business, McKinley also took into account the interests of laborers, which set him apart from other Republicans in his own party, because he believed in certain labor regulations. He was among the first presidents to effectively enforce the Sherman Antitrust Act, and he also appointed various commissions to look into instances of labor that are unsatisfactory, to say the least. Furthermore, back when he was governor of Ohio, this isn't made him very popular. There was a coal miner strike. I think it was called the Chow coal miner strike, wherein the state guard had to be called there by McKinley because obviously he was pro-business at this point. But the other facet of the story is that he compensated each and every one of the coal miner coal miners, showing that he had a heart for the middle class and the laborers as well. This was one of the aspects that made him quite attractive to voters. Another aspect that made him attractive was his imperialism. While he was not an ardent imperialist, he was more so forced to be one as a result of jingoism and yellow journalism. His acquisition of the territories of Guam, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, all that made him more popular in the eyes of the American public, to the point where when he was tragically assassinated in 1901, the stock market experienced a decline because of the uncertainty of the United States' future without the hand of McKinley.
Why was McKinley more physically attractive?
No comment.
Okay, I think that's like all the questions.
No,
Unless we can think. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
The Populist Party faded away and eventually died out. McKinley dragged the United States into a war with Spain and took hold of Cuba, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Bryan was active in the American Anti-Imperialist League to fight for freedom. He ran again in the 1900 and 1908 elections as a Democrat, but lost both times. The populist movement had its successes and failures. Its mission to protect the interests of the farmers had failed, but its mission to fight monopolies and help the common laborer had been mostly successful, and its mission to make the United States more democratic had been a complete success. Many of the populist ideas became law in the progressive movement, even though the progressives were more urban. They also distrusted monopolies and wanted to expand democracy. This is shown in the 17th Amendment, giving Americans the right to directly elect senators. Initiative, referendum, and recall became commonplace. The Populists and William Jennings Bryan inspired many reformers in history and still inspire us today. In conclusion, the post-Civil War era was a time of extraordinary transform in America, economically, politically, and socially. The rise of industry in the North contrasted sharply with the agrarian struggles of the South and West, setting the stage for fierce debates over labor, currency, and corporate power. Farmers, burdened by debt, exploitation, and deflation, mobilized through movements like the Grange, the Farmers' Alliances, and ultimately the Populist Party. Though the Populists failed to win national power, their legacy endured. Their demand for economic fairness, democratic reform, and protections against monopolies were later embraced by the progressive movement. While the populist wave may have receded, its impact rippled forward, reshaping American politics and laying the groundwork for reforms that still define our democracy today.